Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
Hi, and welcome once again. This is the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. We are just a couple of days away from the election, the Canadian election. And it's interesting to look at numbers. And I know we've talked about polling, and, I've reiterated time and time again, the polls are really a snapshot in time. All people are thinking at that particular time when somebody contacted them and say, who are you with and who are you voting for and things of this nature. So it's a very fluid situation. But we mentioned this again because there's a consistency here, and has been since the beginning of this campaign. The numbers as we look at it today indicate that the Liberals at about 43% support, the Conservatives at 38%. Now, that number has fluctuated. I think a couple of days ago it was down to about 3.5%, and it seems to have bounced back up a little over 5%, actually. And it's been as high as 9 or 10, which I think is an unrealistic number. Maybe consistently around 5, though. The pundits seem to say, look, that's telling you a story. Especially the companion piece to this is, who do you want to be the prime minister? And Carney has a huge lead over Pierre Poliev, double-digit lead over Pierre Poliev. And there are messages to be taken from that. I mean, if this is a one-shot thing, you figured, well, okay, that's the train. That's how people were feeling that day. But since Carney has taken over as leader of the Liberal Party, consistently, Carney has had a huge lead over Pierre Poliev when it comes to who should be the leader of this country. And there are a lot of factors in this. We've talked about a lot of them in the podcast over the last little while. One conclusion, and I know it's going to make Conservatives bristle, Canadians just don't like Pierre Poliev. They don't trust him. Never have, ever since he became leader of the party. And the blessing Poliev always had was they hated Justin Trudeau even more. So everybody thought this was going to be a cakewalk. Poliev was going to win in a landslide. He was going to become the prime minister, and the Conservatives, anyway, would live happily ever after. Well, along comes Mark Carney, and all that changed. But it's interesting to see the strategies that are employed here in the last couple of days of this campaign. You may recall a couple of weeks ago that a lot of Poliev supporters were saying, look, the Liberals are trying to make this a Donald Trump election. Donald Trump hasn't even said much about Canada over the last little while. It was a tempest in a teapot. It really doesn't mean anything. Well, Trump was at it again just the other day during a media conference right in the Oval Office, but also with an interview he gave to Time magazine. And he brought up Canada once again, and he talked about U.S. expansion with Greenland and with Panama Canal, the Panama area. But he also talked about Canada. And, of course, Trump's whole foundation for his argument for Canada become the 51st state is all, it's based on lies. And he reiterated this once again to Time magazine. And you've heard all this stuff before, that it costs the United States over $2 billion a year to take care of Canada. That's a lie. Those numbers are totally false. There's no foundation for those. Economists on both sides of the border have shot that down, but Trump still repeats it because his core supporters will listen to anything he says and believe it. He says that they take care of every aspect of Canadians' lives. He says Americans don't need Canada to make cars for us. We don't want them to make cars for us. We don't need their lumber. We don't need their water. We don't need their energy, on and on and on and on. But the reality is, by the way, they do need all of those things. And that's become very evident since he set these tariffs in place a few weeks ago. Steel and aluminum from Canada is still a key part of the U.S. economy and the U.S. manufacturing industries. And they're hurting as a result of this. And that will roll itself out, I guess, and then we'll see how the Americans are going to respond to that. But more importantly, I guess the takeaway here is that, Trump's factor is still very much a factor in this election, because Trump is very much a part of what's going to be happening to Canada's future, economically and otherwise. And the Liberals and Mark Carney are right, absolutely right, to keep hammering at that, because we're not going to do anything stupid like some Americans have done and just pretend, it's just going to go away. Trump is just kind of a blowhard, and, so what? Forget about it because he'll change the next day. No, he won't. There's a consistency there, and there's a mindset there, and now Canada is in the crosshairs. And our defense, our economy, and so many other elements of this are very dependent upon that. And we damn well better elect somebody on Monday that's going to stand up to Trump and stand up for Canada. It's funny that pollster David Coletto, one of the guys who's been doing this for years, different polls, said that, he's, again, reflecting on what we just talked about the fact that consistently Pierre is way, way behind Mark Carney when it comes to favorability to become prime minister. And Coletto observed, and just looking at that single issue, he says, all that Poliev had to do was simply stand up and say, I disagree, and I will stand up against Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is wrong. And I don't know that would have changed everything, but it certainly would have changed a lot of people's polarized opinions about Poliev. But as Coletto mentioned in his piece that was published just the other day, he can't do that. Poliev can't say strong words against Donald Trump. And the reason why is quite simply because an awful lot of Poliev supporters love Donald Trump. They love what Trump is doing. They love MAGA. They probably, we call Maple MAGA and all this, the other acronyms, the Timbit, trumpet, things of this nature. But that's there. And if Poliev were to say things like that and to try to be dismissive of Trump, or even more importantly, if he were to try to condemn what Trump is doing, he'd piss off an awful lot of his core supporters. And he doesn't want to do that. He's not being silent, but he's being very cagey about what he's saying. Well, we'll stand up for Canada, yada, yada, yada. But, you look at the one true champion here. But what's happened as a result of that, and we talked about this in a previous podcast, is now that we're getting down to the short strokes in the final days of this campaign, the effort against Carney, the stuff that's coming out of here, the most vindictive lies and mistruths and misinformation about Carney, especially on social media, is just rampant. I mean, you expect that from Poliev. He does a pretty lousy job of it, but there's a consistency to it, too. Just about everything Carney has ever done in his life apparently was bad. The fact that he was the governor of the Bank of Canada was bad. He did a lousy job. Well, that's a lie, too. Bank of England, same sort of thing. They're trying to find dirt. And if in the absence of dirt, they try to make stuff up. They're condemning him because he works so efficiently with the World Economic Forum. And the characterization there is, well, that's just a huge conglomerate of very filthy rich people that want to take over the world, and they don't give a damn about anybody else. Well, first of all, that's an unfair characterization. The World Economic Forum is polar opposite of that. But did you know, if you're sharing those opinions, that Stephen Harper was a member? As a matter of fact, he not only attended but addressed the World Economic Forum when he was the Prime Minister. Pierre Poliev was a supporter of the World Economic Forum. As a matter of fact, he even spoke about it and his support for it in a speech he made in Parliament some years ago when he was still a backbench MP. So, but now it's not in their best interest to be supporters of the World Economic Forum. So all of a sudden it's a bad organization. So, you're not supposed to remember the past. Just like, Stephen Harper standing up in Parliament and praising Mark Carney for the incredible job he did when he was the Bank of Canada governor in leading us through the recession of 2008 and 2009. In the most recent commercial, you've got Harper there with his glowing visage saying he's going to support Pierre, suggesting that Harper, was the guy who led Canada through the world recession of that day. Well, that's not the case at all. As a matter of fact, as I told you in a previous podcast, Harper and Finance Minister Jim Flaherty were both saying that they didn't think it was going to happen. They didn't think there was going to be a recession. I don't know why they couldn't see it coming. Everybody else in the world could. But they downplayed it until it hit us right in the face. And now Harper wants to take all the credit for it. Let's face it, the reality is, because Harper said so in Parliament, that what happened here is that Carney played a key role in that as the Bank of Canada governor with some of the policies that he enacted. And by the way, repeated those policies when he was with the Bank of England as well. So you can't have it both ways. And by the way, I want to harken back, since I did bring up the commercial that Harper is in right now, where he says that both men worked for him, both Carney and Poliev. Well, that's not true. The Bank of Canada governor does not work for the Prime Minister. He does not work for the government. It's an arm's length agency. He did not report to the Prime Minister. The Bank of Canada governor does not report to the Prime Minister. So his characterization there that Carney was his employee is totally false, as is an awful lot of the other stuff that Harper and Poliev have been saying over the last little while. And speaking of commercials, the other one that's making the rounds these days is, I'm sure you've seen this one, the two seniors that were on the driving range of the golf course, and the guy says, I got to vote Conservative, and basically saying, I got to vote Conservative. You want to give these guys another 4 years? But what's fascinating about this is that not once in that commercial is Pierre Poliev's name mentioned, which I find interesting, to say the least. They don't talk about the policies. There's certainly no picture of them. And they don't even mention it. They're just saying, I'm going to vote Conservative, which indicates to me that maybe the brain trust for the Conservative Party in these waning days of the campaign have finally got the message that, you know what? I don't think Canadians like Pierre Poliev. they're kind of coming late to the party to come to that realization, but they're right, and that it's probably too little, too late. But I find it interesting that that's the focus on where these guys seem to be going right now for those last few days of the campaign. But there are people who are going to blindly just follow the Conservatives because they're the Conservatives. And Poliev, of course, tries to portray himself as a populist. His track record, though, with his time in Parliament, is quite the contrary to that. And this is what I find interesting. It's selective memory that a lot of people have here. And what's interesting about it, when you're in elected office, and by the way, that's the only job Poliev has ever had, by the way, as a member of Parliament, never had to meet a payroll. He's never had to manage an economy, a budget, any of that stuff. He's just been a backbench MP making money at our expense. We've paid his salary. Now we're paying for where he lives and have done that for the last few years. So the guy has virtually no financial experience aside from cashing his paycheck that we supply for him. But over and above that, everything that happens there is on the record. What he says in Parliament is on the record. When he makes speeches is on the record. His expenses are on the record because he charged us for them. When he was the opposition leader this last year and a half or so, he spent more money traveling around the country than Justin Trudeau did, the Prime Minister. And of course, he'd stand up in Parliament and vilify Trudeau for the government spending. He was spending more. But we're not supposed to bring that up now because, well, that kind of runs contrary to the storyline that the Conservatives are giving these days. And again, I find, again, the double standard that seems to be in place here. And I'm not naive. I understand that that's what happens in politics. But, stand up and own your record because that's who you are. And that's the person and the individual that Canadians are going to use to try to judge just what kind of an individual you're going to be and what kind of a leader you're potentially going to be. We're going to talk more this as we get closer to the election day itself, but it's important for us to put these things in perspective and all the dynamic things that are going on. And I'm at the stage right now where I almost get physically ill looking at some of the posts on social media these days about how evil Mark Carney is all of a sudden supposed to be. And we've seen that with the book that we talked about and the characterization there that it's some left-wing, diatribe. It's not. It's based on, and you can tell just by reading the book, which I've done, from a guy who's got a wealth of financial experience and global financial experience and wants to apply that right now. Which, by the way, is another question that gets answered from those on social media, whether it's Facebook or some of the other platforms that I've seen, is why would a guy who's made all that money want to come back here? There's got to be something in it. Well, that tells me two things. First of all, there's that mindset that a lot of people on the far right seem to have is there's got to be an angle for him. He couldn't just be doing it. Let me tell you something. Most people, and I mean most people, go into public office because they sincerely think that they can help something, whether it's their community, their province, their country, whatever the case might be. They're not in it for an angle. I think a lot of people have been sullied by the Trumps and some of these others that are trying to make money out of something like this. Now, having said that, once they get in there, they can go off on their own different tangents, political tangents and ideological tangents. But I think most of them enter into politics for the right reasons. Carney doesn't need the money. But he's a Canadian, and, he's done his time in international business and international politics and everything else, and thinks he can make something and offer something to contribute to the situation that we're in right now, both globally and, of course, nationally. And I applaud him for that. And I think that, he is the guy that we right now need for this country. Everybody, the politician, somebody for their time. Churchill was the man for the times for Britain during World War II. And others have come to the fore like that, whether it's through the Cold War or any other things. FDR, not just, of course, with the war, but with the Reconstruction after the war for the United States. We don't know if anybody else could have done it, but somebody stepped up. It was a Churchill, it was an FDR, and it's going to be a Mark Carney, by all indications, that are going to be that person who's going to take it on their shoulders and say, let's move forward on this. There's nothing wrong with that. It's noble, as a matter of fact, more than anything else. And to try to characterize it as, well, there's got to be an angle. He's doing it for the money. That's not true. Absolutely not true. As opposed to the other guy who's basically trying to keep his job because it's the only one he's ever had. But be that as it might. We're going to talk more about this in future podcasts because I got a lot more to bring up here because there are still some people that haven't voted. I know that the turnout for the advanced polls was incredible, record-setting, as a matter of fact, and that's good news. But I don't want anybody, no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, I don't want anybody to come to the conclusion that, well, you know what, it's a done deal. It looks like Carney's going to win, so, my vote doesn't mean anything. It does. No matter which person you're going to vote for, no matter which party you're going to vote for, the vote counts. The vote matters. So if you haven't voted yet, please please take a few minutes and go and vote on Monday and be part of the democratic process. And we've talked about, the cliches over the years too. Well, if you don't vote, then you don't have the right to complain. You can take that for what it's worth. Just vote. That's the most important element of this, to be part of the process and to have your voice heard. We, as the public, don't get that opportunity very often. I mean, elections only roll around on average every 4 or 5 years in this country, federal elections anyway. And we have a responsibility, I think, to be a part of that. And this is the day for your responsibility coming up this Monday for the election. So please make it count. And we'll talk about the results and go on afterwards. And because if you don't know what might happen. We've seen time and time again where the results of elections have turned a country around the wrong way. Bad judgments are made. Economies can be ruined. People's lives can be ruined. All sorts of things can be happen. We've seen authoritarian governments come to power that basically very quickly try to erode the guardrails of democracy, voting rights, individual rights, legal rights. Those things in many parts of the world right now are a thing of the past. There are people right now that said, what happened to us? Well, you weren't paying attention and you weren't doing your homework. We can't let that happen here in Canada. Nobody is perfect. There is not a perfect candidate. There is not a perfect political party. There is not a political platform that is ideal. None of it is, okay? So we're going to have those disagreements and we're going to have those debates no matter who comes to power right now. There are two elements to this. First of all, there are going to be disagreements and differences. We have to ensure that we elect a government that's going to listen to those dissenting voices. Not necessarily change the policy, but listen and invite the debate, because not all politicians and not all leaders do that. Some of them just slam the door and say, "Yep, shut, I'm in charge." The Viktor Orbáns and the Bolsonaros and the Modis in India are of that ilk. We don't want that in this country, and we don't need that in this country. We don't deserve that in this country if we do pay attention to what's going on. As I mentioned in a previous podcast, I'd rather disagree with my government than fear my government. And there are an awful lot of people in the world these days that fear the people that have taken power in that country. We can't let that happen here. Anyway, more about that later on. That's it for this edition of the podcast. So much going on, and we're so glad that you've taken the time to watch and to respond. And that's all that dialogue that we've talked about as well. If you're new, welcome aboard. You can catch us on Substack, Spotify, Apple, YouTube, certainly, and Blue Sky, and many, many platforms. And we look forward to your input as we go forward. Thanks, as always, to Madeline Kelly for producing the podcast today. And until next time, this is Bill Kelly. Great to have you with us. And in the meantime, stay in touch and stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.